before we prepare for our meditation, I'd like to acknowledge our speaker, who happens to be one of our own and one of my favorite, Katherine McQuay Lewis. In addition to her day job with the federal government, and God knows she needs prayer, Katherine McQuay Lewis is a motivational speaker, workshop facilitator, and certified personal and organizational coach. Her focus is on being your best self, and topics include getting out of your own way, living from your highest vision of yourself, and staying in your own lane. She tries to practice these things in her own life, and occasionally she succeeds. Her favorite place to speak is at Unity of Washington, D.C., and we love having her. So let's give a warm Unity welcome to Katherine McQuay Lewis.
Thank you for joining me in that. Thank you for Richard in joining me in that. That was beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for the choir this morning. I think Reverend Sylvia would say we had church this morning. And I always love it because even if I mess up, you've already had a great experience. So good morning. Please turn to the person on your right and with real feeling tell them, I trust you. Now please turn to the person on your left and tell them, but you I'm not so sure about. Just kidding. Just thought we would start with a little humor. Because who do we trust more than anything or anyone? God, right? But do we? Do we completely and totally and all the time trust? Well, Proverbs 3 verses 5-6 says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Now that does not say trust in the Lord and you will get all the cash and prizes. It also does not say act however you want, do whatever you want, and God will provide. No, we are actually called to do some things here. It's an action plan, a directive. We're being told not to worry or be anxious, but to trust that God has this. We're told to stop thinking that we have it all figured out, lean not on thine own understanding, but instead to slide on over out of the driver's seat and let God be in charge. And we're told to, in all ways, acknowledge him. Our words and actions should be guided by the fact that we know we are a child of God in whom he is well pleased, and we should act accordingly. But when we talk about trusting God, there's a catch, because it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get what we want. But it does mean we will get what we need, as the Rolling Stones song told us, right? I was with a group of people last week, and one guy said, you know, I try to pray for God's will, but then I worry, what if God's will for me doesn't match my will for me? And I've had that thought. But then he said, you know, but God's will is usually better than my will. And another guy said, usually better? God's will is always better than what I could have planned for me, even if sometimes I can't realize it at the time. But along with trusting God, we have to do our part too. We have to do the work. and we have to try to become the best people we can be. My prayer is often, dear God, please help me align my will with thy will. Help me to walk the path you would have me walk and to do the work you would have me do. It's praying, as the Course in Miracles tells us, dear God, show me where to go today, what to do, who to talk to, and what to say to them. And then knowing that when I do that, the right thing will happen. That I can then trust I'm being led and guided, and God and I are co-creating this life together. And we also come to realize that when we do that, when we remember that God is within us and around us, and we are aligning our lives with God, we can trust ourselves because we know God is leading us. I read something that says a bird sitting on a branch is never afraid of the branch breaking because its trust is not in the branch, but on its wings. Believe in yourself. So we trust God and we do the work on ourselves, which I believe, at least for me, is a lifelong job. And that's a good thing because it means I'm always going to try to become the person God would have me be. And we remember it's not going to be a straight line, right? We are going to go like that. We're going to get off the beam. But I love this definition of an optimist, of someone who keeps trying. It's someone who knows that taking a step backward after taking a step forward is not a disaster, it's the cha-cha. And I do a lot of cha-chas. I need to remember that my goal is to accept what is, to let go of what was, and to trust in what will be. To accept what is, to let go of what was, and to trust in what will be. I had 2 conversations recently with 2 different friends, and the first friend was being really challenged at work. She was having trouble with her colleagues. She didn't know what to do career-wise. And she was also really frustrated with her husband and her young kids. The next night, I was talking with another friend, and she was a little sad and a little angry. Nothing was going right. Her adult daughter had dissed her. She was worried about her adult son, and she didn't feel like she was accomplishing anything in right. And I thought, it's the same answer for both of them, because it's the same answer for me. And that's to pray and do the work. And to try an experiment for the next 3 months. Forget about the next steps in your career or trying to improve your kids or your partner, but work on you. And pray and pray and pray. Set aside time every day for prayer and meditation. Ask to be guided in your thoughts and your actions. Then every day try to do just a little better. Better at being the person you want to be, and to remember that you are a spiritual being having a human experience. Of course, it's not easy. Every few days I will start out with a new mindset, and inevitably by the time I'm pulling into my driveway at night, I'm telling myself, well, we can try again tomorrow. But that's the point, that we do try again tomorrow. Because if we do keep trying, we are going to get better. If this is our intention, it's going to make a difference. So we do the work and we trust God. And when we are going through a tough time, I think it's important to remember that this is just a chapter of your life. It is not the whole book. It's not the whole story, it's just a piece of it. But when we're in the middle of something, it can often look like a disaster. We just have to hang in till we get to the other side, and it almost always looks different from the other side. Learning again and again to trust God has been a theme of my life. I spent much of my 20s and half of my 30s praying and praying that I would meet someone, fall in love, get married, and have a child. And some of the time I had complete faith. I trusted that it was going to happen. Other times, not so much. But along the way, it dawned on me that I also had a lot of work to do on myself before I was ready to be anyone's partner. So I did the work, and I continued to pray and visualize and trust. Then in my mid-30s, I met someone, and we began a relationship, and I thought, I think this might be it. So finally one day I said something to him along the lines of, tick-tock. I really want to get married and have a child, and if that's not what you want, that's okay, but I need to know so I can move on. Well, that was most assuredly not what he wanted. But instead of just saying no thanks and good luck, he had to add, come on, Katherine, be realistic. At your age? Yeah. Do you think in the next few years you're really going to have time to meet someone, fall in love, get married, and have a child? Well, as many of you know, my son Alex is now 19. So yes, that is exactly what I thought, and it came to pass. I trusted, not always and not perfectly, but more often than not, I trusted that it would turn out how it was supposed to turn out, whatever that looked like. And I also knew I had to do the work. Trust God and do the work. Matthew 17, verse 20 says, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. But again, I know that this trusting and turning it over business can be very hard. And I will confess that most of you are probably better at it than I am. Case in point, I got the call from Raquel asking me to do this sermon in early December. And I knew I wanted to talk about trust. So on December 10th, I wrote down, I am going to try completely trusting from this point on and see where I am on January 26th. On December 20th, I wrote, haven't managed to stick to it yet. Let's try again. On January 7th, I wrote, I'm starting again today. By January 14th, I had accepted the fact that it's a day at a time. And especially when we're not getting what we want as quickly as we want it, we can get discouraged and we can forget to trust. But I think that's the whole idea, that we need to trust no matter what the external circumstances are. That even when all appearances may be to the contrary, we trust. There's a line we have probably all heard that says either God is or he isn't. Sometimes I think, yes, that's it. Either I trust and I have faith or I don't. But other times I think it's more nuanced than that. And I can have faith and still worry and get discouraged. But that's when I have to come back to trust God and do the work. We know from the Bible that struggles with trust and faith are not unusual. For Mark 9, verses 17 through 24, a man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. You unbelieving generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around. Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can, said Jesus, everything is possible for one who believes. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. And of course, Jesus cast out the spirit and the boy was healed. But from that, we have that line that resonates with so many of us. I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Of course, sometimes life is getting on our one last nerve, and it's hard to believe it's all going to turn out okay. I have a cousin in California who has a very demanding job, and her husband is in the restaurant business, so he works nights and weekends. And she has 3 very active boys, an 11-year-old and 8-year-old twins. So you can see why Nancy's trust factor is sometimes a little lacking. And so one night she had finally put the boys to bed, which is no easy task. But when she went back to the living room, there was the 11-year-old on the computer. Now, this child has always felt that his life ended when the twins were born. And he's not completely wrong. It changed. But this week, he had really been complaining about everything, his family, his brothers, his school. So Nancy said, "What are you doing on the computer? You were supposed to be in bed." And he said, "My life is so miserable that I'm looking for inspirational quotes." But that's just the first part of the story. The second part is that when she put him to bed, she went back and she checked the computer. He was actually looking up how to override parental controls on television. So whether it's our kids or our bosses or our partners or our health, we trust God. We trust God and we ask, "What do you want me to do, God? Show me the way. Direct my path, dear God." Martin Luther King said, "Faith is taking the first steps even when you don't see the whole staircase." We pray and we trust, because left to our own devices, it is easy to get off the beam. And if I'm not being kind to someone, or if I'm not being kind about someone, I know in my heart of hearts that things are not going to go well for me. The spiritual teacher Emmett Fox says, "You can't enjoy gossip and criticism and expect to have a harmonious life." He says you can't have the luxury of resentment and condemnation and also have power in prayer. And he writes that God has given man dominion over all things, and we need to understand that our outer conditions are not the cause, they are the effect. We're not happy because we're well because we're happy. We don't have faith because everything in our life is going well. Everything is going well because we have faith. And he reminds us that the secret to life is to control our mental states. The point of doing the work on ourselves, of course, is that we change and we become the people God would have us be. I heard a great story recently that illustrated this point. A friend of mine was in a store parking lot, and it was early in the morning. She had some errands to run, and you could park there before 8 o'clock without paying the $9. So this day, my friend went just a little beyond 8 o'clock. And when she came back, the parking lot attendant said she owed $9. Well, she said that was ridiculous, that she was maybe 5 minutes late, if that. And they ended up in a screaming match, saying some very harsh things to each other. And my friend slammed their car door, sped home, and was furious. But then when she got home, she realized, this is not who I am. This is not who the God who is in me would have me be. So she drove back, and when the parking lot attendant saw her, you could see she started to get angry again. But she got out of the car, she gave him $9, and she said, "I'm sorry for my behavior." He got tears in his eyes. He reached out to hug her. She cried, she hugged him, and she got in her car and drove back home. That is doing the work. Contrast that to a story I read about that said a woman had received a preliminary diagnosis of very advanced breast cancer. And she was someone who normally kept her opinion to herself, but she thought, well, if I don't have much time left, I'm not holding back. Look where holding back got me. So she had a small list of people who had bothered her for years. She took this opportunity to tell them how she really felt about them. But good news, bad news, false alarm, it was not cancer. It was something called cat scratch fever, and she ended up moving out of state. Do the work and trust God. Now, we've all heard the line, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And of course, if you're like my son, you say, well, being right makes me happy. But I think as we get a little older and or a little wiser, because one does not necessarily equal the other, we realize that being right is not worth the fight. I read somewhere when someone said they are so determined not to get into arguments anymore that if they're told 2 + 2 = 17, they'll say, oh, how could I have been so wrong all these years? Thank you. In John 5, verses 3-8, we hear the story about the healing pool. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned he had been in this condition a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. Now the man had some legitimate concerns, right? Every time he tried to get in, someone pushed past him and he couldn't fight back. But still, he had been in this condition for 38 years. So here was Jesus, of all people, saying, do you want to be healed? And instead of shouting yes, the man was like, well, you know, kind of, but... As I read in one description of this passage, the man was having a pity pool party. But Jesus invited the man to participate in his own healing, to do the work, to get up. But we can identify with that man, can't we? Sometimes it is easier to stay stuck, and maybe even whine about it just a little for good measure. But if we do our part, God will always do his. Do the work. Get up. And I will close with one of my favorite readings of all time that talks about trust in a perfect way. And it's from Melody Beatty's daily book of readings called The Language of Letting Go. And she writes, do not worry about how the good that has been planned for you will come. It will come. Do not worry, obsess, and think you have to control it. Go out hunting for it, or tangle your mind trying to figure out how and when it will find you. It will find you. Surrender to your higher power each day. Trust your higher power. Then stay peaceful. Trust and listen to yourself. That is how it will come. Your healing, your joy, your relationship, that job, that change, it will come to you naturally, with ease, and in a host of ways. The answer will come, the direction, the money, the idea. The path will open itself to you. Trust that, for it has already been planned. It is futile, a waste and drain of energy to worry about how it will come. It is already here. You have it already. It is in place. You just cannot see it. You will be brought to it, or it will be brought to you. Trust God, do the work. Blessings and thank you.